Welcome to my research proposal presentation, titled The Good, the Bad and the Hard to Read, Font Choice and Long-Term Memory. The broad topic I am addressing in my research proposal is that of how we help learners effectively commit the information they read to their long-term memory. Within this area, I'm specifically interested in a handful of studies that appear to demonstrate that written information, printed in fonts that are deemed hard to read, is more effectively committed to the long-term memory. This topic is important to many different types of educational community because most learners are confronted with written information on the whiteboard, in textbooks, in revision notes, on the computer screen, and they are expected to commit much of this information to long-term memory, especially in those establishments catering for older learners. Whilst there are many strategies to aid in this process, the possibility that it may be aided by doing something as simple as changing the font deserves to be explored and, if at all possible, exploited. Furthermore, if the strategies the learners utilise when reading a hard-to-read font could be identified, they could possibly be used to develop metacognitive awareness and as a consequence have a wider ranging impact on learning. With regard to Hazel Grove Prep School, as our learners move up through the school, they are given increasingly large amounts of information in a written form and are expected, with the passing years, to commit it to long-term memory with increasing independence. There is also an expectation that pupils will revise for exams, beginning in Year 5, with revision commonly involving text in some form or another. We use many strategies to support our learners in these processes, but, as suggested earlier, if found to have an impact, the careful use of hard-to-read fonts could support our learners, and any strategies uncovered could be used to develop their metacognitive awareness. Personally, I find this topic fascinating because making things harder for learners, for example using a hard-to-read font, is counter to the inherent belief in the education system which suggests that we as teachers have a duty to make it as easy as possible for our learners to access information in our lessons. If learners cannot access information with ease, it is common for both they and the teacher to feel that they have failed in their role. I also find this topic fascinating because during my recent studies I have come across many suggestions that learners with dyslexia are aided by the use of easy-to-read fonts. However, one study in particular suggests that dyslexics especially would benefit from the use of fonts deemed hard to read, and I was interested in the contrary nature of these two findings. Finally, I am interested in this topic because, regardless of the outcomes, it will inform my teaching practice. My aims for this research are to explore whether reading information that is printed in a font that is deemed hard to read aids the long-term retention of this information, to explore the possible strategies utilised when reading these fonts and consider how and if they could be utilised in the classroom, and finally to begin to consider and investigate the processes that may be at work when reading fonts that are deemed hard to read. My research objectives are to produce a critical review of the literature in the area, produce an overview of the context of the project, to answer the research questions: does reading information in a font that is deemed hard to read aid the retention of this information in Year 6 pupils? If so, are there common traits in the participants who achieve the least or greatest success? Are any particular strategies employed by the participants when reading hard-to-read fonts? Review suggestions for practice found in the school's academic handbook and the book The Learning Powered School in light of any research findings. To review my theoretical framework in light of the research findings and to relate this to current theoretical models and literature. My interest in this topic was initially sparked by the Telegraph article titled "Hard-to-Read Fonts Can Boost Pupils' Results by Up to a Fifth." I then read the research paper on which this article was based. The paper was titled "Changing Fonts in Education: How the Benefits Vary with Ability and Dyslexia." From there I began to further explore related articles about the subject. The conceptual framework I have developed in connection with this project has been inspired by articles and publications from 3 distinct areas of research. These are research in the field of letter perception, research into attention and long-term memory, and finally research into form constancy. Of all the articles listed, the work of McGraw on letter perception has most influenced my conceptual framework. There are several theories that are relevant to this research. The first is how we perceive and identify letters. There are many models of how we perceive and identify letters, but I have chosen to focus on 2. The first, proposed by McGraw, brings together several different ideas. It suggests 4 ways in which we may perceive a letter. The first is the letter concept, an abstract notion of a letter. Each letter will have its own concept, but so will each different form of a letter. So, the A's on the screen will each have their own letter concept. The second way in which McGraw suggests we can perceive a letter is the letter conceptualization. It is a breakdown of the letter concept into a series of ideas about the parts that make it up. For example, one conceptualization of an X might state that X consists of a forward slash and a backward slash of the same size that cross somewhere near the middle. However, a different conceptualization for X may be that it consists of 2 small crescents facing away from each other and kissing somewhere in the middle. The third way in which we could perceive a letter is a letter plan. This starts with a letter conceptualization and fills in the details about how each part should be realized. For example, should a slash be long or short, a crossbar be high or low? Each part has many aspects, and a letter plan is still purely mental, and it could still appear on the page in an infinite number of ways. The final way in which we may perceive a letter is in the shape of a letter form. It is the actual graphic shape represented on the paper, and it realises all the previous concepts: the letter concept, the conceptualization, and the letter plan, all in one. McGraw suggests that we will process letters employing all these perceptions concurrently. He also suggests letter concepts have flexible but strong boundaries that separate members from non-members. Some renderings of a letter concept may be strong, in that it is realised in a way that closely conforms to the letter concept, conceptualization, and the plan. Other examples may lie on the boundary of the concept because its style means it less clearly reflects the concept. This could be true of the fonts that are deemed hard to read. The second model of how we perceive letters was proposed by McClelland and Rumelhart. It suggests that letters are processed from the bottom up, starting with letter features, then letter concepts. However, they propose letters are identified more quickly within the context of a word, as word detectors in the brain give feedback about possible letter choices. It is interesting to consider whether, if the words are rendered hard to identify as a whole due to the use of a font that is deemed difficult to read, might it slow or halt this feedback, making the task harder. The second theory we will consider is how our ability to attend affects long-term memory. If we consider 2 of the most recent theories about how we handle information, we can begin to understand how our ability to attend may affect our chance to commit information to our long-term memory. The 2 theories we are going to consider are the working memory model by Baddeley and the embedded processes model suggested by Cowan. Although the models differ quite dramatically, as you can see, both include an area marked central executive. Whilst Cowan and Baddeley both perceive slightly different roles for the central executive, one of its primary jobs in both models is to control attentional skills. So the central executive can be seen as the gateway to our memory, letting information into our brain where it might eventually be stored in our long-term memory. Therefore, in both models it is, in actual fact, our attentional skills that select which information may be let into our brains to be processed. However, whilst we can pick up information without really focusing upon it, many studies have shown that if we want information to have a good chance of sticking in our long-term memory, we need to make it our focus of attention. Finally, we are going to consider the definition of form constancy. Form constancy is the ability to recognise an object or symbol regardless of the context, size, shape or position. Problems with form constancy could make reading more effortful as letters are harder to identify, and this would place an extra load on the working memory. The findings from the research project will be related back to these frameworks and ideas at the end of the project. I propose the following design for my research project. I will use a multi-strategy research design as I want to collect both numerical, quantitative data and data recorded using words, qualitative data. When collecting the quantitative data, I will use an experimental fixed design, so I will decide on the design prior to carrying it out. I will randomly assign participants to two groups and alter a single variable, in this case the type of font, and then observe the effect. I will also include an element of non-experimental design as I seek to take a measure of each participant's form constancy skills. However, when collecting qualitative information, such as experiences and possible strategies employed by the participants, I will use a flexible design strategy, as the design may need to evolve in order to capture novel concepts and ideas. I feel this multi-strategy design most closely fits the concurrent nested model. That is, it consists mostly of quantitative data collection, but with a qualitative element embedded or nested inside it. During data gathering, I will use two randomised groups of Year 6 students with 10 students in each group. There will be 2 research sessions with each participant, and the participants will always be seen individually. The first session will be approximately 10 minutes long, and in this session I will video record each participant reading aloud the same piece of text, which will be similar in style to the one used in the main body of the research. It will consist of a short series of facts about a fictional animal and be written in vocabulary that all participants can read with ease. The video will be used to collect quantitative information regarding the participants' reading speed, accuracy, automaticity and self-corrections, and qualitative data about their body language. The second session will last 40 minutes or one lesson, and ongoing throughout this session will be video recording to collect data, as I discussed previously, and also to capture additional qualitative data in the form of any answers given during the interview. During this session, the participants will be presented with a passage identical in terms of length and difficulty and layout to the text presented in the first session. However, the content will be different. Group A will have this text presented in a font that is deemed easy to read, and in this case that will be 16-point Arial, and Group B will have it presented in a font that is deemed hard to read, in this case 20-point Monotype Cursiva. Quantitative data relating to the participants' ability to recall the information presented in this text will be collected via the use of a short set of multiple choice questions 30 minutes after reading the text. Participants will have a hard copy of these questions, but they will also be read aloud by the interviewer. Next, qualitative data exploring strategies and feelings about the text and font will be collected via the use of a semi-structured interview. Initial questions will be structured, but supplemental questions may be added by the researcher to clarify or explore answers. Structured questions may also develop and change from one participant to the next if particular themes or areas develop. Finally, quantitative data relating to the participants' form constancy skills will be collected using the TVPS3 standardised test. I plan to analyse and interpret the quantitative data after it has all been collected in. However, I think it is important to analyse the qualitative data as the research progresses. This will allow any findings to inform the structure of the interview questions. After all the data has been collected, I would hope to explore any links between the different types of data. This may shed light on the research questions and other objectives mentioned previously, and provide extra evidence to back up any findings. I will analyse and interpret the quantitative data by using summary statistics, such as the arithmetic mean, to represent findings as a single figure. Also by using exploratory factor analysis in order to explore any possible links between the different sets of data collected. And finally, by comparing and reporting the actual findings of both test groups, and where possible presenting them in visual forms such as bar charts. I will analyse the qualitative data by using thematic coding analysis to identify common themes or ideas in the answers given by the participants. I can then use these themes to help me further analyse the data and, if feasible, begin to formulate metacognitive strategies that may be shared with the participants. I will display them either as written summaries or visually, such as in the form of a flow chart or a diagram, though this will be dependent on the findings. Finally, if possible, I will integrate quantitative and qualitative data by converting any relevant quantitative data into a written form, for example, using phrases to describe the recall of information rather than a digit to show the number of correct answers. I could also convert qualitative information into a numerical form, so for example assigning a number to the degree of movement made by the participant when reading. In this way, I would be able to compare the different types of data and analyse it more easily. When bearing in mind research ethics, I have considered that participants may find some aspects of the research stressful, such as the testing or trying to read aloud in a difficult font or being filmed. I will uphold my duty of care by treating participants fairly, sensitively and with respect. Where possible, I will try to minimise stress by explaining the processes clearly and in detail, and by familiarising the participants with myself as the researcher, the setting if they're not used to it, and, if possible, any additional equipment used, such as a camera. I will also seek to minimise stress by building up a rapport with the participants, and I will make sure they understand that they may stop testing at any time without any adverse consequences, and I will instigate a signal that they may use in order to demonstrate this. I have also considered how I will obtain truly informed consent from the participants. I'll make sure I do this by issuing all concerned parties and participants with the appropriate consent forms and producing each party a written or visual explanation of the research using appropriate vocabulary, fonts and images to convey the information to them. If necessary, I will discuss this information on a one-to-one basis, and I will also allow 2 to 3 weeks for the return of the consent forms in order to allow interested parties the opportunity to discuss the proposal with each other. Where possible, I will explain in detail the processes involved. However, where this is not possible, due to the potential impact on the data, all parties will be fully briefed after the research is completed. The data collected during this research will be used to fulfil the aims and objectives outlined previously, understanding that these will have been explained in full to the participants and any other concerned parties. The data will only be used for other purposes if they are compatible with the original aims, and it will be kept until it is no longer needed for the purpose it was collected for or for any of these further compatible purposes. I will ensure that the findings remain confidential by giving anonymity to the participants and only giving staff and/or governors access to the data in relation to the original purpose of the project or any other purposes that may be compatible. I will also ensure that hard and digital copies of the data are stored securely at school. I will ensure that I will not put myself as the sole researcher in a potentially vulnerable position by checking access and fire escapes in the building I'm going to carry out the research in. I have sound knowledge of the people I will encounter and I have had the appropriate training to deal with participants. However, I will be able to summon help if necessary. The proposed research does not involve using any risky or unusual equipment, and property and belongings can be stored safely. The following is a proposed research schedule, although it may change in consultation with the school. I would begin by giving parental consent forms out a month before the autumn half term, and then follow that up by giving out participant consent forms a week before the autumn half term. This is so the long run-in times are because obviously we have boarding pupils and therefore parents, and so that would give them time to talk to each other about it and to contact me if necessary. Once I've received back all the consent forms, I would hope for the first research session, which would be approximately 10 minutes long, to take place in the first week after half term, possibly in assembly or tutor period or reading period. The second research session, which is 40 minutes or one lesson long, would be held from the second week after half term onwards, and I would hope that all sessions would be completed before the Christmas holidays. The length of time that it takes to fit all these sessions in would depend on which sessions within the school day could be utilised, so whether we just keep them to assemblies and reading periods or whether we actually use some of the academic time. There will be some disruption to lessons and/or assemblies and tutor and reading periods. However, session times will be negotiated with form and subject teachers. To carry out this research, we don't need any extra materials and I won't need any extra help. Any questions or comments would be gratefully received. Thank you for listening.